The phone vibrated against the hotel nightstand. Another work update, most likely. 12 hours into a 16-hour shift at the offshore rig. And the operations team never slept. But this wasn't work. This was home. Or what used to be home. I'm done. I've tried to tell you for months. I'm filing the papers tomorrow. My fingers trembled as I scrolled down to see 3 more messages. Don't bother checking the accounts. I've moved everything. It's the least I deserve after all these years. 5 years of marriage. 8 years together. 15,000 miles from home with 3 more months on contract. And now, nothing but 12 words on a screen and empty bank accounts. What I didn't know then, she had no idea what I'd prepared for exactly this scenario. The satellite connection lagged again, freezing Morgan's face in a half-smile that looked more like a grimace. I waited, watching the pixel blocks shift and reform, hoping the expression would soften when the video resumed. It didn't. So the contractor finally came? I asked, organizing tomorrow's pressure test documents while keeping my eyes on the screen. My small quarters on the rig felt even more confined during these calls, the industrial lighting harsh against the few personal touches I'd managed to arrange. A framed photo of Morgan and me in Bali, taken 3 years ago, sat beside my current work schedule. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Yeah, fix the disposal. Morgan's response came after another lag, voice clipped. Cost twice what they quoted. Did you use the emergency fund or the joint account? Joint account. A pause, longer than the connection warranted. I've been thinking about making some changes while you're gone. I nodded, only half listening as I highlighted a section in the report. To the house? We should probably wait until I'm back to do anything major. And the bathroom renovation already went over budget. Not the house, Alex. The way Morgan said my name made me look up. Changes for me. I need something different. The connection froze again, this time on a look I couldn't quite interpret. When it resumed, Morgan had leaned back, creating more distance from the camera. Different how? My stomach tightened slightly. Just different. I'm tired of waiting 3 months at a time to have a real life. Morgan glanced at something off-screen. I should go. Karen's picking me up for dinner. It's only 6:30 there, I said, checking the time conversion I'd long memorized. I thought we had until 7 o'clock. Plans changed. We'll talk later this week. Wait, are you okay? You seem... I'm fine. Just busy. 3 months is a long time to manage everything alone. The edge in Morgan's voice was unmistakable now. This contract is the reason we could afford the lake house, I said, feeling defensive. Another year of these rotations, and we'll have enough saved to... To what? Have a nice weekend together before you leave again? That's not a marriage, it's a timeshare arrangement. The comment stung. That's not fair. We agreed on this plan together. Things change. People change. Morgan looked directly into the camera for the first time. I need to go. Morgan, wait. Bye, Alex. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the darkened screen. The constant mechanical hum of the rig filled the silence. I glanced at our photo again, Morgan's genuine smile, my arm around those shoulders. When had that easy happiness begun to fade? My phone pinged with an email notification. Our joint account showed a withdrawal of $2,400, significantly more than a garbage disposal should cost. I dismissed it without checking the details. Morgan handled the household expenses. That was our arrangement. I handled the future. The irony of that thought wouldn't hit me until 3 days later. My phone vibrated 3 times in rapid succession, our emergency signal from operations. But when I glanced down, it was Morgan's name. Pressure holding at 4,320 psi, I reported, eyes flicking between the control panel and my phone. The critical well sealing operation required absolute concentration from everyone in the control room. 6 team members surrounded me, each monitoring different systems as we tested the new seal installation. Confirming 4,320, Rajiv echoed, his fingers moving across his own console, holding for 30 seconds before next increment. I couldn't check the message yet. Not during the pressure test. But Morgan never texted during operations. We had a strict protocol after a near-miss incident last year when a personal call had distracted me. Beginning increment to 4,750, I announced, forcing my voice to remain steady. Initiating now. The message notification glowed insistently. My hand hovered over the controls, steady despite the growing unease spreading through my chest. Pressure rising normally, Javier confirmed from his station. 4,400, 4,500. 10 more minutes. I could check in 10 minutes when we completed this phase. 4,650 psi reached, holding for verification, I said. All sensors showing green, another technician called out. No anomalies detected. My phone vibrated again, then again. 3 new messages. Pressure holding steady at 4,650, Rajiv reported. 1 minute mark. The operation continued in meticulous precision, a stark counterpoint to my increasingly chaotic thoughts. When we finally completed the test sequence 30 minutes later, I stepped back from the console. System secured and holding. Good work, everyone, I said, maintaining the professional composure that had become second nature after 15 years on offshore operations. Only when the team dispersed to their next tasks did I finally check my phone. I'm done. I've tried to tell you for months. I'm filing the papers tomorrow. My hand tightened around the phone. I scrolled down. Don't bother checking the accounts. I've moved everything. It's the least I deserve after all these years. The control room suddenly felt too bright, too loud. The pressure gauges that had held steady minutes before seemed to waver in my vision. I opened our banking app. Checking account, $0. Savings, $0. The joint investment account we'd built for 8 years, emptied. My first call to Morgan went straight to voicemail. So did the second and third. I tried our home landline, disconnected. I texted, no delivery confirmation. Everything okay? Javier's voice startled me. He stood at the doorway, concern evident on his face. We'd worked together for 3 rotations. He could read the signs. No, I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Nothing is okay. I showed him the text. His expression shifted from concern to shock. Dios mío, he muttered. By text? While you're out here? I nodded, the professional mask slipping momentarily as my hand trembled. I steadied it against the console, drawing on the same discipline that had carried me through emergency protocols and equipment failures. My calls won't go through, I said, the words mechanical, as if I were reporting a technical malfunction. Use my satellite phone, Javier offered immediately. It's not on any account she would know. After shift, I said, straightening. We have 3 more system checks before handover. Alex, man, no one would blame you. I would. I checked the schedule on the wall monitor. The verification sequence can't wait. I'll handle this afterward. Javier looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded slowly. Whatever you need, my phone is yours when we're done. I turned back to the control panel, focusing on the numerical readouts and status indicators. Here, at least, everything functioned according to predictable parameters. Here, there were backup systems and fail-safes. Here, I still had control. But beneath the professional facade, a singular thought formed with terrible clarity. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, had just collapsed, and I was 15,000 miles from home with nowhere to land. Taylor didn't answer the first 3 calls. When the connection finally went through, there was a hesitation before, "Alex, where have you been? Everyone's been talking." I gripped Javier's satellite phone tighter, pacing the 5 steps my quarters allowed. The dim reading light cast long shadows as I moved back and forth. Outside, the constant churn of the ocean blended with the mechanical hum of the rig, sounds that usually faded into the background, but now seemed to emphasize my isolation. "What do you mean everyone's talking? I just found out today." "Morgan texted me during operations." "Texted you?" Taylor's voice rose in disbelief. "Jesus, Alex. Morgan's been telling people for months that you two were separating. Said you knew that you were emotionally checked out because of work." I stopped pacing. "Months?" "At Caitlin's birthday party 3 weeks ago, Morgan brought someone, a financial advisor friend. They seemed close." My free hand instinctively opened my laptop, navigating to our retirement accounts. The password had been changed, but the balance notification still showed in the corner of the screen. $0. 8 years of savings, gone. "All the accounts are empty," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Not just checking and savings, everything." "Oh God, Alex." The satellite connection crackled with Taylor's sigh. "There's more. Morgan's been using the credit cards. A lot. New furniture, weekend trips, expensive dinners." I pulled up the credit card apps. The balances made my stomach drop. Nearly $30,000 across 3 cards. Charges from luxury stores, high-end restaurants, airline tickets. "Did Morgan mention filing for divorce?" I asked, scrolling through the transactions. "Not just mentioned it, has an attorney already, supposedly one of the best in the city. Morgan's been—" "Alex, I'm sorry, but Morgan's been telling everyone you abandoned the marriage for your career, that these overseas assignments were your way of escaping." The first surge of genuine anger flashed through me. "I took this contract so we could afford the lake house Morgan wanted, so we could build our retirement fund faster." "I know that," Taylor said quietly, "but that's not the story going around." I sat heavily on the edge of my bunk, the reality sinking in. Who else has heard this version? Everyone, Alex, friends, neighbors. Morgan's made sure of it. The ocean seemed louder now, its vastness a perfect mirror of the distance between the life I thought I had and the reality now revealed. "There's an attorney letter, too," I said, opening my email to find the notification that had arrived during my shift. "Just came through." "Alex." Taylor's voice softened. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, the email loaded, its professional language a stark contrast to the personal devastation it represented. "Our firm represents Morgan Davis in the dissolution of marriage. All further communication should be directed to this office. Enclosed, please find documentation regarding the division of assets." Morgan answered on the second ring, as if expecting someone else. The momentary confusion followed by, "Oh, it's you," told me everything. "Thanks for lending me your phone," I said to Javier, who nodded and stepped outside the communications room, closing the door to give me privacy. The windowless space felt appropriately tomb-like for what was left of my marriage. "How did you get this number?" Morgan's voice was ice-cold, nothing like the person I'd shared 8 years with. That doesn't matter, I said, fighting to keep my own voice steady. What matters is that you emptied our accounts and maxed out our credit cards without a word. Without a word? A sharp laugh. I've been telling you for months that I was unhappy. You were too busy with your precious career to listen. I listened. We talked about it, but talking about being unhappy and stealing our life savings are two different things. I didn't steal anything. The defensive edge in Morgan's voice sharpened. I took what I deserved after all these years of waiting around while you built your career. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who's gone more than their home? My fingers tightened around the phone. We agreed on this plan together. This contract was supposed to set us up for the future we both wanted. Your future, Alex, your plan, your career. I was just expected to wait at home like some 1950s housewife. I took a deep breath, my free hand gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. Morgan, we can discuss the divorce like reasonable people, but the money is already spent, Morgan cut in. And my attorney says I'm entitled to half of your current contract pay, too. That's not how this works, I said, forcing myself to focus. I grabbed a notepad and began writing, documenting the conversation. Those accounts had both our names. Taking everything without discussion is financial abuse. There was a pause. Then Morgan's voice lowered. Be very careful, Alex. If you make this difficult, I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. And what's that? A workaholic who abandoned their spouse emotionally and physically, someone who values money over marriage. I have emails, texts, things that won't look good taken out of context, and I have friends who will back me up. The threat hung in the air between us. I continued writing, my handwriting becoming more precise rather than more agitated, a strange calm descending. Is that why you brought your financial advisor to Caitlin's party? To have another witness for your narrative? A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Taylor needs to mind their own business. This is my business, Morgan. My life, too. I set down the pen, suddenly seeing the situation with unexpected clarity. You planned this for months, waited until I was offshore, unable to respond immediately. You weren't supposed to find out until I was ready, Morgan admitted, anger giving way to cold calculation. If you try to fight this, I'll make sure your company hears about your emotional instability. How do you think that will affect your precious career? In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt and confusion didn't disappear, but they crystallized into something harder, clearer. I'll have my attorney contact yours, I said, my voice so controlled it surprised even me. You don't have an attorney? I will by tomorrow. I looked down at the notes I'd taken. Dates, times, threats, admissions. Not the actions of a husband in denial, but of someone beginning to think strategically. Goodbye, Morgan. I ended the call before Morgan could respond, staring at the phone for a long moment before setting it carefully on the desk. When I stood, my legs felt steadier than they had any right to be. I opened the door to find Javier waiting discreetly down the corridor. Thank you, I said, returning his phone. His eyes asked the question, his voice didn't. It's worse than I thought, I admitted, but at least now I know what I'm dealing with. Before Javier could respond, Rajiv appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression serious. Alex, I need to see you in my office, now. Rajiv didn't invite me to sit. We need to discuss yesterday's calibration errors. That's the second time this week. His office was meticulously organized, company certificates and safety awards arranged precisely on the walls, the vast operation visible through the window behind his desk. I remained standing, hands clasped behind my back in what had become an instinctive posture during evaluations. "I understand, sir." My voice remained professional despite the exhaustion pressing down on me. A week had passed since Morgan's text, 7 days of minimal sleep and maximum stress. Rajiv slid a tablet across the desk. "Look at these readings. They're outside acceptable parameters by 17%. This isn't like you, Alex. You've been one of our most reliable engineers for years." The performance graph on the screen showed a clear downward trajectory, almost a mirror image of my personal life. I studied it, searching for an appropriate response that wouldn't sound like an excuse. "I apologize for the errors," I said finally. "I've been dealing with a personal situation." Rajiv's expression softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "We all have personal situations. Out here, we can't afford distractions. Lives depend on these systems working correctly." "It won't happen again," I promised, knowing the words sounded hollow even as I said them. "I need more than promises." He pulled out a formal document, a performance improvement plan. "This is a warning notice. Any further calibration errors or safety concerns will result in contract review." The implications were clear. 3 months remained on my rotation. If terminated early, I'd return home without the completion bonus that made up nearly 30% of the contract value. With no savings, maxed credit cards, and mounting legal expenses, that bonus had shifted from building the future to basic survival. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, Alex?" I nodded, taking the stylus to sign the electronic form. "I understand completely. Is there anything I should know about this personal situation? Anything that affects your ability to perform your duties safely?" The question hung in the air. I could tell him everything: the divorce, the financial theft, the threats. But what would that accomplish except to confirm his concerns about my stability? "It's a family matter," I said carefully. "I'm managing it." Rajiv studied me for a moment. "If you need resources, the company has support services, counseling, legal referrals." "Thank you. I'll consider that." I handed the tablet back, the signed warning now part of my permanent record. 3 more months, Alex," Rajiv said, his tone somewhere between warning and encouragement. "Don't throw away years of excellent work over one bad stretch." I nodded and turned to leave, feeling the weight of the warning like a physical burden. Outside the office, I paused in the corridor, leaning briefly against the wall as the reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. Professional reputation at risk, financial security destroyed, marriage ended, reputation under threat. The thought of returning to my quarters to stare at the ceiling through another sleepless night was unbearable. But the alternative, failure, contract termination, returning home with nothing, was worse. I straightened and headed toward my station for the night shift, each step an exercise in will. The warning had done what Morgan's text and legal threats couldn't. It had shown me that compartmentalizing wasn't working. I needed a different approach, a way to function despite the growing pressure. What I didn't know yet was whether I had the strength to find it. The email subject line read simply, "I'm sorry about how I did this." I stood at the far end of the observation deck, the sunset casting long shadows across the industrial landscape of the rig. This was the closest thing to beauty available in my current world, the fiery orange glow reflecting off both metal structures and endless ocean, creating an illusion of warmth in this mechanized environment. My fingers hovered over the phone screen, hesitant to open the message. 3 weeks had passed since Morgan's text. 3 weeks of legal threats, sleepless nights, and barely maintained professional competence. The notification had arrived minutes after my shift ended, as if timed for when I'd have the mental capacity to process it. Finally, I tapped to open it. Alex, I've been thinking about how I handled things. The text was cruel. You deserved better after 8 years together. I was angry and felt abandoned, but that's no excuse for how I did this. I've transferred some money back to your personal account as a good faith gesture. I think we should talk about how to resolve this without making lawyers rich. Maybe we can find a way to end things that honors what we once had. Call me if you want to talk. I'll answer this time. Morgan. I read it 3 times, searching for hidden barbs or manipulation. The words seemed genuine, but after weeks of shock followed by legal hostility, skepticism felt safer than hope. My personal account showed a $5,000 deposit, a fraction of what had been taken, but the first positive financial movement in weeks. I paced along the railing, the metal walkway vibrating slightly with each step, the constant background noise of machinery creating a strange counterpoint to my racing thoughts. When I finally called, my heart hammered against my ribs. Alex? Morgan's voice sounded different, softer, lacking the cold edge of our last conversation. I wasn't sure you'd call. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted, leaning against the railing. Your email was unexpected. I know. A sigh traveled across thousands of miles. I've had some time to think. The way I did this was wrong. Which part? The text, emptying the accounts, the restraining order? All of it. Morgan's voice cracked slightly. I was so angry, Alex. Every time you left for another rotation, it felt like you were choosing your career over me. But I shouldn't have handled it this way. The sunset had deepened to crimson, the horizon a thin line between ocean and sky. We talked about these contracts, Morgan. We made the decision together. Did we? Or did you decide and I just went along? Remember our trip to Catalina, how we talked about having adventures together once we'd saved enough? The memory surfaced unexpectedly, Morgan laughing as we planned our future on the beach, my arm around those shoulders, the world full of possibility. I remember. That's the last time I remember feeling like we were really partners. Morgan's voice softened further. After that, it was all about the next contract, the next promotion, the next financial goal. I took a deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs. So what are you suggesting now? Let's talk like adults. Figure out a fair division without destroying each other. I've already told my attorney to hold off on further filings. And the money? I'll return more. Not all at once, but in good faith. The truth is, Alex, I've spent some of it. I was angry and reckless. The admission was surprisingly disarming. For the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility that this nightmare might have a resolution that didn't leave everyone scorched earth. I'll need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. Take your time. A pause. Alex, despite everything, I am sorry for how I did this. Not for ending the marriage. We both know it was broken, but for the way I handled it. After the call ended, I remained on the deck until the last rays of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon. For the first time in weeks, tears came, not the desperate ones I'd suppressed since the initial shock, but quieter ones that felt almost like relief. That night, I slept without waking until morning. Javier slid a coffee across the console. You've stopped looking like you're about to jump overboard. Progress? I accepted the cup with a nod, turning back to the calibration readings that had been my focus for the past hour. The control room hummed with normal activity. Technicians monitoring various systems, the soft beep of equipment, occasional radio chatter. A week had passed since Morgan's email, and each day had brought a small improvement in both my mental state and our communications. "Things are stabilizing," I said cautiously, not wanting to jinx the fragile peace that had emerged. "We're talking again, civilly." Javier raised an eyebrow. "Talking is good. Money coming back is better." "Some." I tapped in a sequence of commands, satisfied when the system responded correctly. "Not everything, but it's a start." "And the legal threats?" "On hold for now." I glanced toward the supervisor's office, where Rajiv was visible through the glass wall, reviewing reports. "Performance rating is back up too. Rajiv mentioned it yesterday." As if sensing our attention, Rajiv looked up, gave a brief nod of acknowledgement, and returned to his work. The simple gesture, professional respect restored, meant more than I wanted to admit. "So what happens when you go back?" Javier asked, lowering his voice. "Where will you stay?" The question had occupied much of my improved mental capacity this week. I pulled out a small notebook where I'd been making lists, practical matters that needed addressing for my return. "Short-term corporate housing first," I said, showing him the options I'd researched. "The mortgage payments have been missed, so I'll need to deal with that. But at least I'll have some funds to work with. And Morgan. We'll meet with a mediator, try to work out a fair settlement." The words felt strange in my mouth. Reasonable, practical words to describe the dismantling of a life together. "It's better than the alternative." Javier nodded, returning to his station. "Just be careful, amigo. Sometimes when things seem to be improving—" "I know." I sipped the coffee, appreciating both its warmth and the gesture behind it. "But right now, I need to believe a civil resolution is possible." The rest of the shift passed smoothly. Systems operating within parameters, my focus sharp and professional. When Rajiv stopped by my station before the handover, his comment was brief but meaningful. "Good work today, Alex. The precision is back." "Thank you, sir." After my shift ended, I returned to my quarters and updated my return planning list. Housing options, financial priorities, legal representation. The simple act of making these notes, creating order from chaos, brought a measure of peace I hadn't felt since the initial text message. Another deposit had appeared in my personal account, smaller than the first, but confirmation that Morgan's words weren't empty. We had exchanged several brief business-like emails about practical matters. No warmth, but no hostility either. Perhaps this was how mature adults handled the end of a marriage, with dignity rather than destruction. The thought brought a measure of comfort as I prepared for sleep. My phone chimed with a notification sound. The legal notice arrived at 2 a.m., deliberately timed for when I'd be asleep or disoriented. Emergency restraining order granted. I sat upright in my bunk, sleep evaporating instantly as I stared at the screen. The document was official, court-stamped, ordering me to remain at least 500 feet from Morgan and our former home upon my return. The ground cited threatening communications and emotionally abusive behavior. As evidence, the filing included screenshots of text messages I'd sent during the first days after Morgan's announcement, messages taken out of context, with certain portions highlighted and others omitted entirely. My desperate pleas for explanation had been reframed as threats, my confusion as harassment. While I was still processing this, another notification arrived from the storage facility where, apparently, all my personal belongings had been deposited. The automated message reminded me that fees were accumulating and payment was required within 30 days to prevent auction. My hands shook as I navigated to my banking app. The small deposits that had appeared over the past week were still there, but a new withdrawal had been made from my emergency fund, an account Morgan shouldn't have known existed. The realization crashed over me like a physical blow. The reconciliation attempt, the apparent remorse, the small financial returns, all of it had been a calculated tactic to discover what resources I still had access to. I opened my email to find a message from our mortgage lender, forwarded from our home address. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. 3 months of missed payments. Property scheduled for auction. The neat list I'd been creating for my return now seemed childishly naive. There would be no civil mediation, no reasonable division of assets. The home I'd planned to return to no longer existed, not just emotionally, but literally. My belongings were in storage, accumulating fees I couldn't pay. A restraining order would prevent me from even approaching what had once been our shared life. I sat motionless in the darkness of my quarters, the only light coming from my phone screen as notification after notification arrived. Each one a new revelation of betrayal, each one carefully timed for maximum impact. The worst part wasn't the practical devastation, though that was overwhelming enough. It was the realization that I'd allowed myself to hope, that despite all evidence, I'd wanted to believe in Morgan's capacity for decency. That vulnerability had been expertly exploited, used to extract information about my remaining resources and plans. The final message arrived as dawn began to lighten the sky outside my small window. Further communications should be directed to my attorney. Any attempt to contact me directly will be reported as a violation of the restraining order. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, feeling a coldness settle into my bones that had nothing to do with the rig's aggressive air conditioning. The careful planning, the timing of each revelation, the strategic withdrawal and re-engagement, all of it spoke to a level of calculated cruelty I couldn't have imagined from someone I'd shared my life with for 8 years. What remained wasn't just the question of how to respond, but a more fundamental one. Who had I actually been married to all this time? Taylor's voice had that careful quality people use with terminal patients. "There's something else you should know, Alex. I didn't want to tell you this, but..." The fluorescent lights in the communication room seemed harsher than usual, casting sharp shadows across the metal desk where I sat. I gripped Javier's satellite phone tighter, knuckles whitening. After the restraining order, the foreclosure notice, and the storage facility bills, I didn't think there could be worse news. I was wrong. "Just tell me," I said, my voice flat. The numbness that had settled over me since the middle of the night legal notifications felt protective now, a buffer between me and whatever was coming. "Morgan's been seeing someone for months." Taylor paused, the connection crackling with static. "The financial advisor, Eric." Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. "The one who helped hide the assets." "Yes. They went to the Riviera together last month, used your joint credit card for the hotel." I pulled my notebook closer, pen moving mechanically across the page as I documented this new information: dates, places, names. The act of recording felt important somehow, turning emotional devastation into concrete data points. "How long?" My voice remained steady, surprising even me. "From what I can piece together, at least 6 months, maybe longer." Taylor's hesitation was palpable, even across thousands of miles. "There's more, Alex. Morgan's been telling people at your company about your emotional instability, sent emails to some of your colleagues." I set the pen down carefully. "Which colleagues?" "I'm not sure exactly. Someone named Peterson was mentioned." "Peterson." Our regional director, the man who approved contract extensions and overseas placements. I pulled out my tablet, attempting to check my professional accounts, only to find access denied. My company email showed an auto-response. Account temporarily suspended pending review. Alex, are you still there? I'm here. I checked social media next. Accounts where Morgan and I had shared photos of our life together, trips we'd taken, the home we'd built. Each one returned the same message. User has blocked you from viewing this content. They've been systematically erasing me, I said, the realization crystallizing with terrible clarity. Not just from the marriage, from everything. I'm so sorry, Taylor's voice cracked. This isn't fair. None of it. When I ended the call minutes later, I sat motionless under the buzzing lights. The methodical notebook with its neatly documented betrayals seemed suddenly childish, as if bringing order to chaos could somehow make it manageable. This wasn't just a divorce or financial theft. This was the deliberate dismantling of a life. As I stood to leave, Javier appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from friendly concern to alarm. "Alex?" he asked, studying my face. "What happened?" "Everything," I said, walking past him with an unnatural calm that felt like floating outside my own body. "And nothing that matters anymore." I found myself researching countries without extradition treaties with the U.S., places where someone could disappear completely. My quarters had deteriorated along with my mental state. Unwashed clothes piled in corners, meal trays with food barely touched, work documents scattered across surfaces. The neat lists and organized plans from weeks before seemed like artifacts from another life, created by someone I no longer recognized. The laptop screen glowed in the dimness as I scrolled through information about visa requirements, banking systems, employment possibilities in remote locations. Not a practical plan, not yet, but the idea of simply vanishing had taken root, offering a strange comfort. Start over. Become someone else. Leave Alex Davis and his shattered life behind. A knock at the door interrupted my research. I minimized the screen before answering. Javier stood in the corridor, concern evident in his expression. "You missed dinner." "Again." He held out a container. "Thought you might need this." "Thanks. I'm not hungry." I made no move to take the food or invite him in. He studied me, taking in my unshaven face, the rumpled clothes I'd worn for days. "This isn't like you, Alex." "When was the last time you slept?" "I'm fine." The words came automatically, meaningless sounds to end the conversation. "You're not fine. No one would be." He hesitated. "Do you want to talk about it?" "There's nothing to talk about." I stared past him at the metal corridor, finding it easier than meeting his eyes. "I appreciate the food, but I need to prepare for tomorrow's shift." "Alex." "Good night, Javier." I closed the door before he could respond, returning to the glow of the computer screen. In the small mirror above my sink, a stranger looked back at me, hollow-eyed, pale, with several days' growth of beard. I barely recognized myself. Behind me, visible in the reflection, was the photograph I'd brought from home. Younger versions of Morgan and me smiling on a beach somewhere, sun-kissed and full of easy confidence. "Who were you?" I asked the younger version of myself. "And who are you now?" No answer came, of course. Just the constant background noise of the rig, machinery humming, distant voices, the endless ocean surrounding us. I returned to my computer, mechanically performing minimum work duties for the next day's shift, email responses, system checks, safety protocols. My fingers moved across the keyboard while my mind drifted elsewhere, to empty bank accounts, to a home in foreclosure, to a career potentially derailed by whispered accusations. The thought of returning to face it all seemed impossible. Each time I tried to formulate a plan, exhaustion overwhelmed me. I hadn't eaten properly in days. Sleep came in brief, jagged intervals, broken by nightmares. I found myself standing at the small window, staring at the dark ocean below. How easy it would be to simply walk into those waters, not as an act of desperation, but as a final assertion of control, choosing an ending rather than having it inflicted upon me. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it brought a strange calm, not because I wanted death, but because having the option meant I still had a choice. Some small power remained mine. I turned away from the window, unsteady on my feet. The room tilted strangely, darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. I reached for the desk to steady myself, but my hand found empty air instead. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the passport on my desk, the thin blue booklet that could take me anywhere in the world, yet nowhere I belonged anymore. The fever peaked at 103, and with it came my grandmother's voice, dead 5 years, but suddenly clear as the medical monitors beeping beside me. You always were stubborn about asking for help, Alexander. The medical bay swam in and out of focus. White walls, stainless steel equipment, the steady rhythm of monitors tracking my vital signs. Dr. Chen moved efficiently around the bed, adjusting an IV drip, checking readings. Dehydration, exhaustion, and a respiratory infection, she explained when she noticed my eyes tracking her. Your colleague found you unconscious in your quarters. You've been here for 26 hours. I tried to respond, but my throat felt raw, words emerging as a dry rasp. The shift is covered. She checked my temperature again. You're on medical leave until I clear you, which won't be soon if you keep pushing yourself to collapse. When she left, the room fell into a strange half-light, neither day nor night. Time lost meaning as the fever ebbed and flowed, bringing with it fragments of memory and dream. My grandmother appeared again, sitting in the chair beside my bed. Not as she was at the end, frail and diminished, but as I remembered her from childhood, straight-backed, silver hair pulled into a neat bun, hands never quite still. You think you're the first person to have their heart broken? Her voice held the familiar mix of challenge and affection. To have someone take what wasn't theirs to take? Not the same, I managed, unsure if I was speaking aloud or only in the fever dream. No, your grandfather left me for his secretary after 30 years of marriage, emptied our accounts, told everyone I was unstable. She twisted the gold band she'd never removed, even after he left. Sound familiar? I turned my head on the pillow, the effort exhausting. What did you do? First, I cried for 3 days, thought about driving my car into the river. Her gaze held mine, unflinching. Then I got angry. Then I got smart. How? The word came out as barely a whisper. I stopped trying to save what couldn't be saved. I stopped letting his actions define who I was. She leaned closer, her image wavering between solid and transparent. The marriage died, Alexander, but I didn't have to. The monitors beeped with increasing urgency as my temperature climbed again. Dr. Chen returned, her movements calm but purposeful as she adjusted medication, applied cooling measures. Words floated around me, IV antibiotics and fever reducer and observation protocol. Time stretched and compressed. In lucid moments, I stared at the ceiling, too weak to move, but increasingly aware of a strange clarity emerging from the physical misery. The complete surrender to illness had stripped away the last pretenses of control, leaving something raw but honest beneath. My grandmother's voice came again, softer now. The ring? She twisted the gold band. I kept it, not because I wanted him back, because it reminded me of what I survived. I gave it new meaning. Dawn light began to filter through the small window, casting patterns across the white bedding. The fever had broken during the night, leaving me wrung out but clear-headed for the first time in weeks. Dr. Chen checked my vital signs, nodding with satisfaction. Temperature's normal. How do you feel? Like I've been hit by a truck, I admitted. But my head is clearer. Good. You'll stay here another 24 hours for observation. The company has issued a medical leave warning. It's standard procedure for collapsed workers. I nodded, too exhausted to feel concerned about the professional implications. Could I have some paper? And a pen? She raised an eyebrow, but complied, bringing a notepad and ballpoint from the desk. When she left, I stared at the blank page for a long moment. Then, with steady hands, I began to write. Not frantic notes documenting betrayal, but a clear-eyed assessment of what remained, what was truly lost, what could still be saved. For the first time since Morgan's text message, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, not even hope yet, but the quiet certainty that while much had been taken from me, who I was remained my own. Dr. Chen found me making lists, assets, liabilities, allies, enemies. Planning an invasion? She asked, checking my temperature. The morning light filtered through the medical bay's small window, casting ordered patterns across the white sheets. Everything in this space had a purpose, a place, a function. After days of mental chaos, the clinical environment felt reassuringly structured. More like a counteroffensive, I replied, continuing to write. The simple act of organizing information on paper brought a strange clarity. The fever had broken not just physically but mentally, leaving behind an unusual calm. Dr. Chen reviewed my chart, nodding with satisfaction. Temperature normal for 24 hours. Blood pressure stable. She studied me with clinical interest. Your recovery rate is impressive. Does that mean I can leave? Physically, yes, but I'm recommending 3 days of light duty. She set the chart down. Whatever you're planning, pace yourself. Relapses happen when patients rush back too quickly. I nodded, returning to my lists. The left column contained what I'd lost: home, savings, most possessions, aspects of my professional reputation. The right column, what remained: my engineering expertise, my contract position, tenuous but still mine, a small emergency fund Morgan hadn't discovered, a few loyal connections. Have you eaten this morning? Dr. Chen interrupted my inventory. Yes, actually hungry for the first time in days. She handed me discharge papers. Sign here. Report back if you experience fever, dizziness, or respiratory distress. When she left, I continued my assessment. The emotional wounds would take time, that much was obvious, but the practical problems had potential solutions. My engineering mind, trained to troubleshoot complex systems, began to engage with the challenge. I stood carefully, legs steady beneath me, and moved to the small bathroom. The mirror revealed a face thinner than before but more present, eyes clear, expression focused. I shaved methodically, each stroke removing a physical layer of the breakdown period. Returning to my notes, I added a final category: skills applicable to current situation. Systems analysis, risk assessment, documentation, protocols, resource allocation under constraints, recovery procedures, For the first time in weeks, I felt something like myself. Not the naive person who had received Morgan's text, but someone new emerging from that crucible. Still damaged, but functioning. Still wounded, but healing. The discharge form waited on the bed. My official transition back to duty, back to the world. I signed it with a steadier hand than I would have thought possible days earlier. When I returned to my quarters, a message light blinked on my computer. Please report to legal department at 1400 hours today. Diane Martinez, Chief Counsel. Diane didn't waste time with platitudes. The company has concerns about your accounts being compromised while on assignment. This isn't just about you anymore. The legal department's conference room felt like entering another world. Polished table, proper chairs, a video screen occupying one wall. After weeks in cramped quarters and the medical bay, the space seemed luxuriously professional. I sat straighter, instinctively adopting the posture of a professional meeting rather than a personal crisis. I understand. What specifically concerns the company? Security primarily. Diane was perhaps 50, with short salt and pepper hair and the direct gaze of someone who didn't suffer fools. Your credentials were used to access company systems from unauthorized locations while you were verifiably on the rig. A chill ran through me. Morgan has my passwords? Apparently. Fortunately, our security team caught it before any sensitive data was compromised. She studied me with unexpected sympathy. Doctor. Chen mentioned you've been ill. She didn't specify why. The moment hung between us. The decision whether to separate personal crisis from professional concerns or acknowledge their intersection. My spouse emptied our accounts and filed for divorce while I'm offshore, I said finally. It's been complicated. Diane nodded, no surprise registering in her expression. I thought it might be something like that. She reached for a tablet, tapped a few commands, and the screen on the wall came to life. I've scheduled a call with someone you should talk to. The video connection established, revealing a woman in a professional office setting. This is Catherine Walsh, Diane explained. She specializes in cases involving financial fraud during divorce proceedings, particularly for clients who work internationally. For the next 40 minutes, we discussed specifics, banking regulations violated by sudden account emptying, legal implications of using my credentials for unauthorized access, options for emergency injunctions filed remotely. When Catherine finished her assessment, she looked directly at me through the screen. You have a stronger case than you realize, Mr. Davis. What your spouse has done goes beyond divorce tactics into potentially criminal activity. After the call ended, Diane remained seated, studying me with an appraising look. Catherine doesn't take cases she can't win. Why are you helping me? I asked, the question that had been building throughout the meeting. The company's security concerns don't extend to my personal finances. Diane's expression shifted, a brief vulnerability appearing before her professional mask returned. 3 years ago, I returned from our Singapore office to find my husband had sold our house, emptied our accounts, and disappeared with his personal trainer. Her left hand was noticeably bare of a wedding ring. The company stood by me then. Its policy to support our international staff through personal crises. The unexpected connection stunned me. I had no idea. Of course not. I don't advertise it. She gathered her papers with efficient movements. But I do understand it. The isolation, the shock, the way it makes you question your own judgment. She pushed a folder across the table. These are the forms Catherine needs you to complete. My team will help facilitate the filings since you're offshore. We've also frozen your company credentials and issued new ones. I took the folder, feeling something I hadn't expected, a sense of alliance, of not facing this alone. "Thank you," I said simply. Diane nodded, standing to end our meeting. She extended her hand across the table in a formal gesture that somehow contained genuine human connection. "Document everything," she said, as we shook hands. "Build your case like you'd approach an engineering problem. And remember, you're not the first person to survive this. You won't be the last." The engineer in me took over. Every problem, no matter how personal, can be reduced to systems, documentation, and leverage points. My quarters, once a reflection of my mental disarray, had transformed along with my approach. Technical manuals and legal documents replaced scattered personal items. The bed was made with military precision, the desk organized with methodical care. This wasn't just cleaning, it was reclaiming space, both physical and mental. Over the following days, I constructed the case with the same discipline I applied to complex technical problems. The timeline emerged with clarity. Morgan's subtle account transfers beginning 6 months earlier, the strategic timing of the text message during my critical operation, the calculated reconciliation attempt coinciding exactly with the discovery of my emergency fund. The restraining order filing uses edited versions of my messages, I noted in an update to Diane. I have the original texts saved to cloud storage. Morgan doesn't know about. Her response came within hours. "Excellent. Catherine says edited messages submitted as evidence constitute fraud upon the court. Document the timestamps and any metadata." I created folders for each category of evidence: financial records, communication history, witness statements. Taylor had provided dates and photographs from social events where Morgan had appeared with Eric, the financial advisor. Javier had written a statement about my condition when receiving the original text message. The patterns revealed themselves like flaws in a technical system, predictable once identified, exploitable once understood. Morgan's financial maneuvers violated banking regulations regarding joint accounts. The use of my credentials to access company systems constituted potential computer fraud. The edited messages submitted to court were provably altered. "Focus on documentation, not retaliation," I reminded myself, adding the note to my growing case file. This wasn't about punishment, but protection of what remained, of what could be rebuilt. I developed a 3-phase plan for return: immediate protection, emergency injunctions to freeze remaining assets, secure temporary housing, establish legal representation. Legal response: filing counterclaims with evidence, addressing professional reputation concerns, challenging fraudulent court submissions. Long-term recovery, financial rebuilding, career continuation, personal healing. Working through each element brought a satisfaction I hadn't expected. Not happiness, but the solid ground of competence. The skills I developed over 15 years of engineering challenges transferred perfectly to this personal crisis. System analysis, documentation protocols, failure recovery procedures. Late one evening, as I finalized the timeline document, a fleeting memory surfaced. Morgan and me planning our future on a beach years ago, full of trust and shared dreams. The pain still came, but differently now. A dull ache rather than a stabbing wound. I acknowledged it, then returned to my work. I no longer kept our photographs visible, not destroyed in anger, but stored away as artifacts of a past that no longer defined my present. In their place stood the calendar with my return date circled, not a dreaded reckoning, but a strategic objective. When I finally closed my laptop that night, exhaustion came. the healthy fatigue of meaningful work rather than the crushing weight of despair. For the first time since Morgan's text, I felt something like confidence. Not that everything would be okay, that naive belief belonged to my former self, but confidence that whatever came next, I had the capacity to face it. That while much had been taken, something essential remained. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, with the first phase of my plan ready for implementation upon waking. The emergency motion hit the court system at 9:00 a.m. precisely. By 9:17, Morgan's access to the remaining accounts was suspended pending investigation. I watched the digital timestamps appear on screen with a satisfaction that felt almost alien after weeks of reactive crisis management. The communications room, once a place where I'd received devastating news, had transformed into a command center, laptops open, documentation organized, strategy in motion. The court granted the emergency freeze order faster than expected, Catherine said via video conference, her professional tone carrying a hint of approval. Your documentation made a compelling case for financial impropriety. Diane nodded beside me, eyes on her tablet where notifications continued to appear. The bank has initiated their own investigation into the irregular transfers. Once they flag potential fraud, additional protections activate automatically. What about the restraining order? I asked, maintaining the calm focus that had become my new center of gravity. We've filed a motion to dismiss based on the evidence of edited messages, Catherine explained. The judge has scheduled an emergency hearing for next week. Unfortunately, you'll still need to abide by the order until it's formally dismissed. Understood. I made a note on my planning document. That still gives us time to secure temporary housing through the company program. Diane turned to me. The security team confirmed unauthorized access attempts to company systems from your home IP address last night. We've documented each instance. A brief flare of anger surfaced. The thought of Morgan sitting in what had been our home, attempting to access my professional accounts. I acknowledged the feeling, then channeled it back into strategic thinking. Add that to the evidence file, I said. It demonstrates pattern and intent. Catherine's expression remained professional, but her next words carried understated approval. Mr. Davis, I've handled dozens of similar cases, and few clients maintain your level of documentation and strategic approach. It's serving you well. We spent the next 30 minutes refining our strategy, addressing potential responses, establishing secure communication channels for my return, finalizing the documentation package for court. Each step followed the three-phase plan I'd developed, each action serving a specific purpose. Remember, Catherine cautioned as our meeting concluded, the goal is protection and recovery, not punishment. The system will handle consequences. Your focus should be rebuilding. I nodded, understanding the distinction with new clarity. I don't want revenge. I just want what's fair. That's precisely the approach that will serve you best, she affirmed. As Diane and I gathered our materials, my phone chimed with a notification. Morgan's name appeared on screen, the first direct communication attempt in weeks. What the hell do you think you're doing? These accounts are mine. And so it begins, Diane observed dryly. I looked at the message without the crushing despair that would have accompanied it weeks earlier. The legal machinery was in motion. Documentation was filed. Protections were in place. For the first time since that initial text message, I was no longer simply reacting to Morgan's actions. I was advancing on my own terms. Javier slid his tablet across the console. You should see what's being posted. Your ex has gone nuclear. I glanced at the screen while continuing to monitor the pressure readings on my station. The control room hummed with normal activity, technicians moving between stations, status reports being called out, the steady operation of the rig continuing regardless of personal dramas. The social media post displayed on Javier's tablet was from a mutual friend, someone I'd known for years. It contained a lengthy, emotional account of my supposed abandonment and emotional abuse of Morgan, complete with carefully edited screenshots of old arguments. "There are dozens like this," Javier said quietly, "friends being pressured to take sides." I nodded, returning my attention to the calibration sequence I was completing. "Document it, please. Forward anything relevant to the legal team's secure address." "That's it. No response?" Javier looked surprised. Responding would only fuel the fire. I adjusted a setting, nodding with satisfaction as the system responded correctly. "Catherine says this kind of escalation is predictable when legal consequences begin." Rajiv approached from his supervisor station, clipboard in hand. "Davis, calibration logs from yesterday. 100% accuracy. Keep it up." "Thank you, sir." The simple professional acknowledgement carried more weight than Rajiv could know. Confirmation that despite personal chaos, my professional competence remained intact. After he left, Javier shook his head. "How are you so calm about this?" "If someone was saying these things about me, I'm not calm inside," I admitted, completing the final calibration sequence. "But engaging with it directly accomplishes nothing." During my break, I retreated to a quiet corner of the mess hall, closing my eyes for a 5-minute meditation practice Dr. Chen had suggested. The simple act of focused breathing had become a strange anchor, not eliminating anger or hurt, but creating space around those emotions, preventing them from dominating my actions. My phone vibrated with an update from Catherine. "Morgan has attempted to contact your employer directly with accusations. Company legal has redirected all communications to me. This pattern of escalation suggests our strategy is effective. Continue documentation, but maintain non-engagement." I forwarded the new social media posts Javier had collected, then returned to my duties. The contract completion date was now just 3 weeks away, a deadline that had once loomed as a threat, but now represented a strategic milestone. That evening, I received another direct message from Morgan, more desperate in tone. "You'll regret this. I know things about you that would destroy your career. Last chance to drop everything and agree to my terms." I documented the message, forwarded it to Catherine without response, and returned to reviewing the return logistics plan Diane had developed. The threats that would have devastated me weeks earlier now read like predictable moves in a game whose rules I finally understood. The quiet power of non-engagement was becoming clear, not as passive surrender, but as strategic strength. Each unanswered provocation, each professional duty completed despite distraction, each calm documentation of false claims represented a choice to advance rather than react. The barbell felt different now, not just a way to pass time offshore, but a metaphor made metal, each rep rebuilding what had been torn down. Early morning light filtered through the fitness room's small windows, casting long shadows across the equipment. I'd established a routine in these final weeks, rising before the main shift, rebuilding physical strength that had deteriorated during my illness, preparing body and mind for the challenges ahead. Dr. Chen entered, clipboard in hand, pausing to observe my workout. "Your recovery continues to impress me," she noted, checking items on her list. "Blood pressure normal, weight returning to baseline, sleep patterns improved." Following doctor's orders, I replied between sets, the familiar burn in my muscles, a welcome sensation. It helps to have something constructive to focus on. She nodded, professional, but with genuine approval. Physical resilience often parallels emotional resilience. Both require consistent effort and proper recovery. Around us, other crew members move through their own routines, nodding greetings, exchanging brief comments about shift schedules or equipment status. The normalized interactions represented another form of recovery, my reintegration into the social fabric of the rig after weeks of isolation. "Final medical clearance signed," Dr. Chen said, handing me a form. "You're officially released for full duty and return travel." I accepted the document, another piece of the methodical preparation for departure. Later that day, Rajiv would provide the contract completion paperwork, confirmation that despite everything, I had fulfilled my professional obligations. After my workout, I showered and returned to my quarters, now organized and functional. The contrast with the chaotic space of my breakdown period couldn't have been more stark. Physical order reflecting internal clarity. My phone contained a message from Taylor. "Flight arrives 2:15 p.m. I'll be there to pick you up. Don't worry about a place to stay. Guest room is ready." The simple offer of support, practical, matter-of-fact, without drama, meant more than elaborate promises could have. The knowledge that someone would be waiting when I stepped off the plane provided a foundation that Morgan's campaign couldn't undermine. I finalized my return checklist. Temporary housing arrangements confirmed through the company program. Legal representation in place. Secure communication channels established. Initial court hearings scheduled. Each item represented a structure being rebuilt on stronger foundations. The calendar on my wall showed the return date circled in red. No longer a dreaded deadline, but a strategic milestone. 3 days remained on the rig, then the journey home to face whatever came next. I found myself standing straighter, breathing more deeply, sleeping more soundly. The crisis remained unresolved, the challenges ahead substantial, but something fundamental had shifted. The desperate scramble for survival had transformed into purposeful advance. In my final communication with Catherine before departure, her assessment was simple. "You've done everything possible to prepare. The rest will unfold as it will. But you're returning with strength rather than weakness." Looking at the contract completion documents on my desk, mission accomplished despite personal crisis, I felt something that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Quiet confidence. Not in perfect outcomes or easy resolutions, but in my capacity to face whatever came next. I packed my few personal belongings, including the photograph of Morgan and me that I'd kept stored away, not displayed as before, but preserved as evidence of a chapter completed rather than a future destroyed. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since that devastating text message, I was moving forward rather than falling. I saw Morgan before Morgan saw me. 3 months of righteous anger had carved new lines around eyes that widened in shock at my calm appearance. The courthouse corridor stretched between us, polished floors, high ceilings, the formal architecture of justice. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the space where our lives would be officially disentangled. Catherine stood beside me, briefcase containing our meticulously organized evidence. Diane had accompanied me as both company representative and moral support, her presence a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. Morgan sat on a bench with Eric, the financial advisor whose professional ethics had apparently accommodated both an affair and financial fraud. They were dressed expensively, projecting confidence that faltered visibly when they spotted us approaching. "Remember," Catherine murmured, "minimal interaction. Let the documentation speak for itself." Morgan rose as we neared, expression shifting rapidly between defensive anger and calculated vulnerability. "Alex, we could have settled this without all this drama." I nodded politely, but directed my response to Catherine rather than engaging directly. The simple act of redirecting communication, a boundary established and maintained, felt like reclaiming power that had been taken from me. "The judge has reviewed our evidence package," Catherine informed me as we moved to a bench on the opposite side of the corridor. "He's particularly interested in the altered text messages submitted in the restraining order application." Morgan's attorney approached, a distinguished man whose initial confidence had diminished considerably since receiving our evidence file. "Ms. Walsh, might we discuss a potential settlement before proceeding?" "My client's terms were provided last week," Catherine replied evenly. "They remain unchanged. The settlement terms were fair but firm. Division of remaining assets based on contribution, return of my personal property from storage, formal withdrawal of the fraudulent restraining order, and acknowledgement of the unauthorized financial transfers." When we entered the courtroom 30 minutes later, the judge's expression was serious as he reviewed the documentation before him. "I've rarely seen such comprehensive evidence of financial misconduct in a divorce proceeding," he noted, looking over his glasses at Morgan and Eric. The proceedings unfolded with a formality that felt appropriate, legal language transforming personal betrayal into matters of fact and law. Morgan's attorney spoke briefly, no longer contesting the central facts, but seeking to mitigate consequences. "Your Honor, while my client acknowledges certain financial irregularities, we ask the court to consider the emotional context of—" "Counselor," the judge interrupted, "edited text messages submitted as evidence constitute fraud upon the court. I've reviewed the original messages and the versions submitted with the restraining order application. The differences are not ambiguous." When the judge announced his ruling, emergency restoration of half the marital assets, dismissal of the restraining order, and referral of the financial evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation, I felt no triumph, only relief that justice could function even imperfectly. Morgan attempted to catch my eye as we left the courtroom, but I maintained my focus forward. This wasn't about ignoring her existence. It was about choosing where to direct my limited emotional resources. Outside in the sunlight, Diane touched my arm briefly. "Well done." The simple acknowledgement meant more than elaborate congratulations could have. I had entered the courthouse with dignity and left with both legal vindication and my integrity intact. It wasn't the end of the process, but it marked a crucial turning point. The moment when the system recognized what had happened and began to restore order from chaos. Jamie stirred her coffee for the 4th time without drinking it. "I didn't know what to believe. She was so convincing, and you were just gone." The cafe near Taylor's house provided neutral territory, public enough for comfort, private enough for honest conversation. Steam rose from my own untouched cup as I considered my response to this former friend who had initially sided with Morgan but now sought reconciliation. "I understand," I said finally. Morgan had months to establish her narrative while I was offshore. Jamie's gaze remained fixed on her swirling coffee. "The things she said about you, they never quite matched the person I'd known for years, but she was so certain." Taylor, seated beside me, maintained a protective silence. My sibling had been my most steadfast supporter throughout, offering both practical help and emotional ballast during the worst periods. "What changed your mind?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "The bank documents," Jamie admitted. "When the court findings became public, no one fabricates that kind of evidence." She finally looked up. "And then I saw her with Eric at Riviera Grill last month. The timeline she'd given us about when your marriage ended suddenly didn't add up." I nodded, sipping my coffee. Over the past weeks, similar conversations had played out with various friends, some apologetic like Jamie, others maintaining distance despite the evidence, a few pretending they'd never taken sides. "Some friendships won't survive this," Taylor had warned me. "Not because you've done anything wrong, but because admitting they were manipulated would require too much self-reflection." That prediction had proven accurate. The social landscape I'd returned to resembled the aftermath of a storm, some structures standing stronger for having weathered it, others permanently damaged, and some simply gone. "I'm not looking for apologies," I told Jamie, meaning it. "I'm interested in moving forward with people who value truth and integrity." Jamie's relief was visible, her stirring finally ceasing. "Is that possible? Moving forward, I mean?" "I'm figuring that out day by day," I said. "Some relationships are worth rebuilding. Others serve their purpose in a different chapter." When we parted an hour later, the interaction felt like one more piece of my life being reclaimed, not restored to its previous state, but rebuilt with greater awareness of its true foundation. Taylor and I walked through the farmer's market afterward, a simple activity that would have been unimaginable during my darkest days on the rig. The normalcy of selecting vegetables and exchanging pleasantries with vendors felt almost miraculous after months of crisis. "How does it feel?" Taylor asked as we browsed a display of local honey. "Seeing people from before. Like speaking a language I once knew fluently, but now have to translate in my head," I admitted. "The basic vocabulary is the same, but the meanings have shifted." Taylor nodded, understanding without requiring elaborate explanation, one of the gifts of our relationship. "Some people have reached out that I never expected to hear from," I continued. "Others I thought were close friends have maintained radio silence despite knowing I'm back." "Their loss," Taylor said simply, selecting a jar of honey. The straightforward loyalty meant more than complex justifications could have. Walking through the market, engaged in ordinary weekend activities, I felt another piece of normal life reclaimed, not identical to what had been, but perhaps more authentic for having been tested. Taylor introduced us with simple clarity. "Sophia, this is my sibling Alex, the one I told you about, who survived what you're going through now." My new apartment was modest, but distinctly mine. Organized bookshelves, simple furniture, a few carefully chosen photographs. The space reflected my current reality, neither luxurious nor deprived, but functional and increasingly comfortable. A small balcony overlooked a park where the evening light filtered through autumn leaves. Sophia sat on the edge of my couch, hands clutched around a folder similar to the one I'd created during my own crisis. Her eyes held the haunted look I recognized from my own mirror months earlier, the shock of betrayal still fresh, the disorientation of a life suddenly unmoored. "Taylor says you might be willing to—" She hesitated, uncertain how to frame her request. "To share what I learned the hard way?" I finished for her, sitting in the chair opposite. "Absolutely." For the next hour, I walked her through the practical steps I'd developed: documentation protocols, financial protection measures, communication boundaries, legal resources. With each item, her posture straightened slightly, the overwhelmed desperation giving way to tentative focus. "I created these templates for organizing evidence," I explained, sharing digital files I'd refined through my own process. "The legal system responds to documentation, not emotion." Taylor slipped out quietly during our conversation, leaving us to the kind of exchange that can only happen between people who have walked similar paths. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Sophia asked finally, the question beneath all the practical concerns. I considered my answer carefully, wanting to offer truth rather than platitudes. The acute pain subsides. It transforms into something different, more like a scar than an open wound. You'll always know where it happened, but it stops defining every moment of your existence. She nodded, absorbing this with visible relief. My friends keep telling me I'll find someone else, like that's the goal. But that's not what I'm worried about right now. Finding yourself again comes first, I agreed. The rest follows if and when it's right. As we concluded our meeting, I mentioned the support group I'd started. 16 families now, navigating similar crises with mutual support. Some marriages were saved through honest reconciliation. Others ended, but with dignity intact. Every situation is different, but the principles of self-protection and integrity remain constant. After Sophia left, a message arrived from Taylor. "You just did for her what I wish someone had done for you from the beginning. Full circle." I stood on my small balcony, watching the park below where families and couples and solitary individuals moved through their evening routines. 6 months earlier, I couldn't have imagined this moment, standing in my own space, professionally intact, emotionally scarred but healing, helping others navigate the storm I'd survived. The company had offered a new position, division lead for offshore operations, with less time on rigs and more strategic responsibility. The role would have been unattainable within my marriage to Morgan, who had resisted any career advancement that didn't involve returning home permanently. Last week, I'd met someone for coffee. Not a date, just conversation. For the first time, I'd shared my story without feeling like it defined me. The capacity for trust was returning, not as naive openness, but as careful discernment. The long way home wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it had led to a truer destination than the one I had left behind. 2 years after that text message, I sometimes still wake reaching for a phone to check for emergencies. Old habits die slowly, but I no longer wake with dread. The bank accounts hold less than our joint accounts once did, but they're secure. My home is smaller, but truly mine. The betrayal that seemed like an ending became the unwanted journey that led me to myself. I learned that security isn't in another person's promises, but in my own resilience. Some wounds leave scars, but scars are evidence of healing, not just injury. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. But also believe this: betrayal reveals truth not just about them, but about your own strength. Document everything. Secure what you can. Find the right allies. Let integrity rather than emotion guide your response. Distinguish between genuine remorse and tactical retreat. Remember that your value was never determined by their treatment of you. Know that rock bottom can become a foundation. Understand that forgiveness doesn't mean returning to vulnerability with someone who has proven untrustworthy. Last week, I met someone for coffee. Not a date, just conversation. For the first time, I shared my story without feeling like it defined me. I've begun to recognize the difference between healthy caution and paralyzing fear. The support group I started has helped 16 families navigate similar crises. Some marriages were saved through honest reconciliation. Others ended but with dignity intact. My capacity for trust is returning, not as naive openness, but as careful discernment. The long way home wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it led to a truer destination than the one I left behind.